Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show, there's actually another team in the AFC I wanted to talk about, and actually in the same division as Cleveland, as we spoke about earlier on the show, and that's the Baltimore Ravens. And the reason why I bring the Ravens up for today's podcast is I was curious. Like, most people right now do consider the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs the top two teams in the AFC, and I understand why. The Baltimore Ravens deserve a lot of credit for the season they had last year. I'll happily admit, going into the season, I was a doubter of Lamar Jackson, even though I always knew he was very athletic. I just didn't know if he would be able to pass as well and as efficiently as he did, and I didn't know that Coach Harbaugh could design the offense for Lamar Jackson as much and as effectively as he did. So Harbaugh is one of the 5 best coaches in the National Football League. Lamar is one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the National Football League, as he won that MVP last year. But the reason why I bring the Baltimore Ravens up is because I was thinking, what should we expect from the Baltimore Ravens in 2020? And it's easy to say, oh, they're just going to be as good. It's easy to say, oh, they're the favorite to win the Super Bowl. But I feel like not a lot of people realize just how good, not only just how good, but basically everything went right for the Baltimore Ravens last year. Like, they finished 14-2, and they were very good, and as good as Lamar Jackson was, and as good as Coach Harbaugh is, the question I have for you guys is it realistic to not only expect Lamar Jackson to have the same season this year as he did last year, but also, can the whole Baltimore Raven team finish with the same success as they did a season ago? And what exactly I mean by that is, like, literally everything went right for Baltimore last year. Lamar was great. They lost 2 games early, and they literally didn't lose a game until the playoffs came around. You had Lamar Jackson, who had the great season. You had Mark Ingram, Hollywood Brown, Willie Snead. Your offense and defense both gets better, in my opinion, by drafting J.K. Dobbins, the young running back from Ohio State. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you trade for Calais Campbell, one of the best pass rushers in the league from Jacksonville. So on paper, the Ravens could be even better. But there are a bunch of things, I think, when I look a little more closely at the Baltimore Ravens, then I'm going to make a prediction for the Ravens very early. I do think the Baltimore Ravens are going to be a playoff team next season, but I think that they're going to finish like around 11-5, and they're going to be closer to like 10-6, 11-5 than 14-2 again. And there are a couple reasons why I say this. Number one, the National Football League is basically a league where over the last 20 years, unless your name is the New England Patriots, if you have one of those crazy seasons, 14-2, even better, odds are you're down to take a step back. You remember the Carolina Panthers after their season when they went 15-1, they didn't even make the playoffs the following year. And going into that season, no one could have ever expected that. And I'm not saying that's going to happen with these Baltimore Ravens, but at the same time, I could definitely see them taking a little bit of a step back. You also have to consider the division they play in. Pittsburgh has one of the better defenses in the National Football League, and Big Ben Roethlisberger is going to start the season under center for the Steelers. The Browns, we just spent a whole segment talking about them. The Browns not only went into Baltimore and beat the Ravens last year, but even though he's in his first year, Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski and Browns quarterback Baker Mayfield are just under a bunch of pressure to win. So both of Baltimore's games against Cleveland, including their Week 1 matchup, is going to be a lot of pressure, a lot of intensity, and both of those teams are really going to be looking to have a win. And also the Cincinnati Bengals now have Joe Burrow. I don't know how good they're going to be, but one thing will be for sure, I think they're going to be better than last year's team because last year's team was just so bad. I don't really know how you could get any worse. But the other thing about the Baltimore Ravens that I wanted to mention, and once again, right now when you consider all right, what do most people think of the AFC? Who do most people think is the front runner to win the AFC? And the Baltimore Ravens are a team that a lot of people would put at the top of that list, along with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think you also have to factor in that right now, besides Baltimore and Kansas City, I don't think there's really that third clear-cut team in the AFC that everyone kind of wants to latch onto as a team that could possibly get to the Super Bowl. I think a lot of that could have to do with quarterback play. There aren't really that many established quarterbacks besides Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes in the AFC. And even Lamar Jackson, he won an MVP, but he still has a lot of other things to prove. Luckily for him, he's still very young. You have Big Ben, who's established, but he's a little older and has his injury concerns. Same with Phillip Rivers. Josh Allen, I like the Bills' defense. I like their running game. I like their coach, but I have my concerns about him. Cleveland has the talent. We spoke a lot about them. New England is a question mark at quarterback. So really, I think that could have a lot to do with it, that besides Kansas City and Baltimore, there really isn't that one established team in the AFC that you could latch onto, and quarterback play does have a lot to do with that. But at the same time, Lamar Jackson, as good as he was last season and as much credit as he deserves, we have to all face facts. He hasn't been good in the playoffs his first 2 years. And the Baltimore Ravens last year went 14-2, and they were very impressive, and they deserve credit for that. But I was able to tell in that playoff game against the Tennessee Titans, as soon as they went down a decent amount, not only did I feel nervous for them from a pure football perspective, because Lamar Jackson, as good and as dynamic as he is, when he's running the ball, usually you do know it's coming. And I totally understand that everyone's going to say, oh, well, Zach, in a normal circumstance, everyone knows he's running the ball and he's not getting stopped then. Why is he getting stopped now? And I get that point, he's very dynamic, he's very good, and most of the time he is running the ball as to opposed to passing. But with that being said, Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense aren't built to come back from a 14-plus point deficit. And I remember saying this 2 seasons ago when they lost that playoff game to the Chargers at home. It was actually, when you looked at that game a little closer, it was kind of similar to that playoff game against the Los Angeles Chargers, Lamar's first year, because if you remember, in that playoff game, the same thing happened. The Chargers got off to a touchdown or 2 lead, and Lamar Jackson was awful. He couldn't even complete a pass. He threw for 50 yards, and all the Raven fans were begging for Joe Flacco to enter the game at quarterback. That's how bad it got for Baltimore during that playoff game. And really, this past season, the Baltimore Ravens went 14-2. They were the most dominant team in the National Football League, and all of that really just went down the drain because of one bad performance against the Tennessee Titans. And as dynamic as Lamar Jackson is, as good of a coach as Coach Harbaugh is, if I'm a Raven fan, I'm always kind of keeping those thoughts in the back of my mind that if we do get down, sometimes we could have a hard time coming back. And I think now that the rest of the National Football League may have that book out on the Baltimore Ravens, now that the rest of the National Football League knows if the 2 times that this dude has been in the playoffs, the formula to beat him is getting off to a touchdown or 2 lead, and then just don't turn the ball over from there, and we'll be good. I am curious to see if other teams around the National Football League that are playing Baltimore this season are kind of all right, now we have the scouting report on how exactly to beat Baltimore. We've now seen this happen in the playoffs twice. Maybe there is a book on the Ravens and how to beat them. And once again, I'm not saying that the Ravens are going to, fall apart and miss the playoffs, because in the AFC, besides Kansas City and Baltimore, there aren't really that many good established teams. Most people are saying Buffalo could be one of those teams, and I think they can, but I'm definitely not confident. Their quarterback still really worries me, and even though they were very good last year, they didn't really have that much of a track record. And I don't know, I'm just never comfortable saying that the Buffalo Bills are going to be a lock team to be very good, as long as Josh Allen is their quarterback. New England, Tom Brady's no longer there. We've never seen Jarrett Stidham play in a big, meaningful game ever. Pittsburgh, same thing with them. Very good defense, but plenty of question marks at quarterback. Cleveland, same thing, plenty of question marks all around. Houston is a team that has the quarterback, but I don't think anyone really trusts Bill O'Brien to be their head coach. And if they couldn't win or even get to a Super Bowl with DeAndre Hopkins on their team, what really makes you think that they're going to be able to make it without DeAndre Hopkins on their team? Tennessee was 1 win away from the AFC Championship game last year, and they beat Baltimore, but does anyone really trust Ryan Tannehill to consistently get the job done? And I think when you look at the Tennessee Titans, in Baltimore's case against Tennessee, that was a very fascinating game because the Titans were really built in the right way to beat Baltimore. As soon as Ryan Tannehill threw that long touchdown pass to, I want to say Khalif Raymond, all the Tennessee Titans did was just run the ball right down the Baltimore Ravens' throat, and they couldn't be stopped. And I think that has something to do with it also. Derrick Henry was freakishly good in the postseason last year, and he ate the Ravens alive, and that definitely didn't help their cause. But I'm just very curious, and once again, it's early. It's the first day of June. There isn't really that much news going on around the National Football League, so I'm trying to come up with things to talk about with you guys. And this was just an observation that came to mind, that I wouldn't be shocked if next year the Baltimore Ravens are closer to 11-5 than they are to 14-2, because last year they just didn't really face that much adversity, and you saw in the playoffs when they went down 14-0 against the Tennessee Titans, and they really did see that adversity for the first time. They didn't really know how to respond, and you also saw that the year prior to that in their playoff game against the LA Chargers. So as good and as dynamic as Lamar Jackson is, and as much credit I will give him for the season he had last year, I think the main reason why I will still by far and away put the Kansas City Chiefs as my favorite to come out of the AFC over Baltimore is because of the quarterback position. Patrick Mahomes is 4-1 in his career in the playoffs, and his only loss was in overtime against the best quarterback of all time, while Lamar Jackson in his 2 career playoff games are 0-2 and just hasn't really been able to get anything figured out during those 2 games. So we'll see what happens with Baltimore this season. I'm curious to what you guys think. Where do you guys think the Ravens will be closer to finishing this season record-wise? 14-2 or 11-5? I personally think they're going to be closer to 11-5, but we'll see. And that's the beauty of the National Football League. Not a lot of people really expected Lamar Jackson to be as good as he was last season and win the MVP. I certainly was a doubter. He definitely turned me into more of a believer with the season he had last season. But I just think Baltimore is going to be good, but not as good as last year. I can't see everything going right the way it did last year again.